Hi there, I'm Lauren and welcome back to my YouTube channel Sweet Smiling Soul, where I talk about all things sewing. This year I realised that the sewing projects that I enjoyed the most weren't necessarily the ones that were the most impressive or fast to make, but they were the ones that were slow and scrappy and meaningful. So today I am sharing 7 sewing projects that have changed the way that I sew and why. So if you like sewing in a calm and resourceful way, using what you have, then I think you'll like this video. So the first project was this Bob Dylan inspired denim jacket. My husband came across a Reddit post where somebody had shared a patchwork denim jacket that Bob Dylan wore in a movie which was called Hearts of Fire, and it was from the 80s, I believe. I've upcycled and refashioned denim jackets before, and this particular jacket reminded Lawrence of those jackets that I'd made, but a jacket that was on a whole different level. So he encouraged me to kind of replicate it as best I could, just using what I had, and this is what I ended up coming up with. So this is actually the second one I made, and the third one is right here. So they don't look 100% identical, but they're very similar. This project was really meaningful to me because it was just so slow and meditative. I've sewn on, I don't know, I haven't actually counted them, but there's probably like close to 100 different patches, and I've mostly hand sewn the patches. Some of them on the back I was able to get them under my machine, but then the ones on the arms I ended up hand stitching with embroidery thread. The first one that I made took me about a week, and then these two, because I'd already made it once, it ended up being a little bit quicker, but yeah, still it was a lot of work. And what I loved about it was just that it was super slow, it was super scrappy. It was a really great way for me to use the fabrics that I already had in my sewing stash. There are also a lot of embroidery features in this one. So there's like a little peace sign that I hand stitched. There's this kind of floral fire looking sign. There's also a flower here that I embroidered by hand. So yeah, a lot of floral embroidery patterns, and also some blanket stitch on the pockets. And yeah, it was really creative and fun, and nothing like I'd ever really made before. It's very loud. So I think what I enjoyed about it the most was that it was just really slow, mindful, meditative in a way. I had my audiobooks on, I was just in the zone, and time just flew by. I was completely in the flow, and I love those kinds of projects because I always feel so fulfilled and satisfied after I finish them. I ended up creating a 3-part series on putting the first one together if you want to check out a little bit of behind the scenes and a little bit of my creative process. So yeah, this was a very fun, creative project, and I'm so happy that I was able to make this. The original jacket ended up selling at auction for $25,000, and the actor Timothy Chalamet purchased it because he was the actor that played Bob Dylan in the movie that was released I think it was last year or the beginning of this year. I think it was called A Complete Unknown, and Timothy Chalamet played Bob Dylan, so I think he was just trying to maybe connect with the character and connect with Bob. So he ended up purchasing the original jacket that was worn by Bob in the movie from the 80s. So that's just a little fun fact. I wouldn't say I'm a big Bob Dylan fan, but I am a fan of patchwork on denim. So that was the biggest inspiration for me. The next meaningful project was this cat-shaped patchwork cushion. So what made this extra special was that it was a project that I had made in my early sewing years. So I've been sewing for about a decade now, and one of the first projects I made was a cat-shaped cushion inspired by my cat at the time. And I made it in grey and just had like a white nose and whiskers. So it was pretty simple, but it was a really great beginner project. So I found the template earlier this year, and then I was inspired to make it again, but this time just using my fabric scraps and whatever I had on hand. So this one was a little bit more funky than my original cat cushion, but it was a lot of fun to make, and I ended up making a video tutorial on this. And what is extra special about this is that it's completely stuffed with fabric scraps as well. So this makes it a complete zero waste sewing project, which isn't always possible, you know, that we do create a lot of waste when we sew. So it was a really great way for me to just put all those little scrappy bits that I wouldn't really be able to do anything with, and I was able to just kind of stuff it with those scraps so that it's made a very plump cushion. So that's a project that I really enjoyed, and I loved that it's like bright and colourful, and I was able to use up all those little pieces that are in my scrap box. And it's also a bit more interesting than a regular square cushion. I have a pattern for this now, which you can purchase from my website. So if you want to make one yourself, you can check that out. And there's also a video tutorial to go along with it. The next sewing project that I really enjoyed and really had to kind of stop myself from making because I didn't want to have too many products and not know what to do with them. But basically it was putting together these Scrappy tote bags. So I also shared a video on YouTube of me making these. But what was special about this is that, yes, again, I'm using fabric scraps, using those tiny little pieces that I probably would normally chuck, but I was able to just kind of incorporate them into this collage patchwork tote bag. What makes it even more special is that it became a beginner-friendly project for me to use at my practice sewing workshop. So in the new year, I'm hoping to host some in-person workshops in Melbourne. So I ended up running a practice workshop, or two actually. The first one was with my husband, and he actually made this. He's never touched a sewing machine before, and he was able to put this patchwork tote bag together. So I was really happy to see that someone who had no sewing experience was able to create this. So after I tested it with my husband, I ended up testing it with 3 other people, and they were also beginners and absolutely loved it. They all were able to put together a tote bag, and that just confirmed that this could be a great sewing workshop option for me to host in the new year. So that's what also made it extra special for me. So it's scrappy, it's using up what you already have, and it's also a fun, beginner-friendly project, which is a bit different to a regular tote bag. So these patchwork tote bags are made with fabric scraps, and then how I've sewn everything together is just by using tulle and then quilting over the top so that everything stays together. So that's the technique here that makes it quite easy for beginners. So we just focused on having a front panel and a back panel, and the back panel was just plain. So the front panel was the patchwork design, and everyone just kind of created a collage and then sewed over the front with some tulle on top, and then we used that as a single piece of fabric and turned it into this tote bag. That was one project where I used that technique, and then the other one was turning scraps into a purse. So I ended up making several of these little lined zipper pouches, and it's the same technique with tulle over the top of my scraps to keep everything in place. So I've got a few others here. I have made this one, and I even like cut out some little shapes like the deer and a love heart, and yeah, just kind of turned it into a collage. So yeah, I was super happy making these. I absolutely loved putting these together, and I'm extra excited to teach this technique even more in person in the new year at some of my sewing workshops. So there's a tutorial for both the purse and the tote bag. If you want to check that out on YouTube, you can have a look and sew it together yourself using your scraps. The next thing that was a really big project and super meaningful to me was the dollhouse storybook. So I made a little doll at the beginning of the year and started off with just creating a little bedroom and wardrobe for her, and then my inner child just roamed free and ended up expanding on it and creating a dining room and a bathroom and a living room and a hobby room, and I just couldn't stop myself. I just absolutely loved it, and that was such a slow and enjoyable project. It was again meditative, much like the Bob Dylan jacket. I would have my headphones on listening to an audiobook or podcast, and I was just in the zone putting this together. I was so inspired, and others started to give me feedback on it, and they were just like, wow, it's so cute. And so that inspired me to create a pattern for it, and then that took maybe 2 months or so with a bit of help from my husband. We put together the sewing pattern, and then I ended up being able to sell that as a digital product in my online shop. So it's been super exciting to kind of see all that unfold. I started this one in March, and it's just continued to grow. And then just a month or two ago, I ended up expanding on it and creating this adventure book. So now the doll can go on a little adventure, and it includes all the adventures that I loved to go on as a child. So I just kind of stepped back into my child self's shoes and thought about all the things that really excited me as a kid. And camping was one of those things. I loved camping. I loved having picnics. I loved hammocks. I still love hanging out in a hammock. I love boat rides. I always thought that was so much fun. I loved playing on the beach, and I also loved swinging on swings, and I loved tree houses, so I just had to put a tree house in this book. And I also just loved sunshine and rivers and nature. So now the doll can have her own little house, but she can also go on an adventure, and it's just been such a joy to make, and it's been so great to see everybody's feedback. I know a lot of you who watch on here have purchased the pattern and put it together yourselves, and it just lights me up. I can't get over how it's all unfolded, and I'm just so happy and grateful that this idea came into my life and I was able to expand on it, and yeah, just have fun and do it really for fun. I think that's the biggest thing. So it's kind of made me think differently about some of the projects that I make. So this one is definitely a slow, relaxing project. It's meditative, like I said, and that is more important to me than just kind of making something quick. It has a lot of meaning, and I see it as more like a keepsake, something that could be kind of passed down generations. I think also the fact that I was just able to connect with my inner child and just play, really. This has been such a playful sewing project. That is how that went down and how it kind of also changed the trajectory of my business as well. So what started as a fun, playful idea has turned into another income stream for me in my creative business. So it's all kind of tied together, and I think the best thing is that it's just felt so aligned and true to who I am and what I value, and it's been a great scrap busting project. So yeah, lots of different things have come out of just starting this project and kind of going with the flow. So yeah, that's been a really cool experience. So if you're looking for those patterns, you can purchase them from my website. I'll link it all in the video and in the description so you know where to find those. The next thing was my Papasan chair cover. So I purchased a Papasan chair on Facebook Marketplace, and I wanted to make a new cover for it because it was just grey and plain, and I thought it would be a great way to use up some of my larger scraps or fabrics that have just been in my stash for years and I just didn't know what to do with. So I ended up putting together this cover and create something colourful and interesting and something that kind of just gives my living room a bit of a pop. So that was really fun to put together, and I was also able to use some really chunky buttons that I had in my stash, and I also didn't know what to do with. You know how we just collect some things over the years and you're like, oh, I'll use that one day, and you just don't really have a project for it. I was so happy that this project allowed me to use up those bits and pieces that were in my sewing cupboard, and yeah, I was able to create something super unique. So every time I have visitors, I get lots of comments on it, and also made me think differently about the scraps that I have in my cupboard, and even things that aren't necessarily scraps, but they're just old bits of fabric that I purchased years ago. And years ago I fell in love with them, but then now I don't really find them attractive anymore, I guess. So I do have a lot of those kinds of fabrics where, like, once upon a time I loved them and now I don't so much, but I was able to give them a purpose. So when I put those fabrics against another fabric, it actually looks a lot better in my eyes, and I tend to appreciate it a little bit more. It's kind of been a thing throughout all my projects this year. For this one in particular, because I needed larger squares to create the patchwork, it really got me thinking about how I can use what I have already and make it look good and still feel good about the finished product. One of the biggest things that's been on my mind this year is being more resourceful and using what I have and not going out and buying new fabrics. And yeah, unless it's like clothing, which I'll get to next, but the Papasan chair was just a great way for me to think a little bit outside the box when it came to using up my fabrics. It was a way for me to minimize waste. It was a very mindful sewing project, which I really appreciated. So I would say this was just a light, fun, experimental project that turned out really well. And it also made me realize that there are some fabrics that can be appreciated again alongside another fabric. That was kind of the lesson I learned. Then I started to think about my other patchwork projects, and yeah, started to fuss less about whether something goes with something else, if that makes sense. The next project that I worked on was sewing my summer wardrobe for our trip to Europe. So I didn't have many summer clothes that were kind of, I don't know, in fashion. My wardrobe was was feeling a little bit outdated, and I was planning this trip to Europe, and I just wanted something that would make me feel a bit more confident, and I needed some new pieces just to kind of jazz up my wardrobe. And for this trip, I ended up packing mostly handmade items, which I was super proud of. So I ended up making 7 items the week before we left, and it was also the week before we moved to this new property. So it was really hectic, but I was amazed by what I was able to create in 1 week. So I used a lot of Common Stitches patterns, and what I love about their patterns is that they're just so simple. There's super easy instructions, and they're all really lovely, and their patterns are versatile. You can change them up a bit, you can make them your own, and I really just loved making these new items and yeah, freshening up my wardrobe. So I ended up making the pipit vest about 3 times. I also made the bottle brush pants, and I made the shorts version as well. So the bottle brush shorts and pants. I made 2 of the shorts, 1 of the pants, and I also made 1 extra top, which was the Tudor blouse by Stitch Witch Patterns. And that was actually the top that I made for my wedding dress. My wedding dress was a 2-piece, and I had the Tudor blouse as a top and then just a high-low bridal skirt. It was really fun to make that pattern again, but more as a summer top, so it wasn't so formal. I ended up wearing the Tudor blouse top and the bottle brush pants to a wedding in Austria, and I really enjoyed just wearing something that I made. I really love it when I can do that. And then I had a few different outfits from the pipit vests and the shorts that I could kind of mix and match with. So I ended up having several outfits that I could use in Europe, but just using a couple of different pieces. So changing them up a bit allowed me to have more outfits. I feel like for that project I was quite mindful with what I was making, what fabrics I was using, how it was gonna go with other pieces in my suitcase as well. So it was very much a wardrobe reset, which I felt like I really needed at the time. And I was just, again, blown away with how I was in the flow and I was able to just produce that much in a week. It worked out really well, and I can link those patterns in the description below if you're curious. And also I made a behind the scenes video, so I'll link all that and you can check it out as well. I usually buy new fabric if I'm making clothes for myself. Not always, like sometimes I can use secondhand fabrics that I find at op shops and things. I really wanted like to freshen up my wardrobe, and it made sense for me to buy the fabrics that I was drawn to at the fabric shop. So I ended up treating myself to some fabrics, but I wanted to make sure that I had a clear project in mind. I think that was kind of the lesson learned there. So now when I make clothes in the future, I'm definitely gonna think about what fabric I want to use, and if there is a fabric that I absolutely love, I want to make sure that I know what project I'm going to make with that fabric, rather than just getting the fabric because I love it and then having it sit on my shelf for years, because that happens a lot. So yeah, I would say it was definitely a mindful project, and I learned that it's good to have like a specific project in mind before you go ahead and just buy fabric. And the final project that I worked on, which I felt was quite meaningful, was the fabric crown. So I ended up making these Christmas crowns in last week's video, and I think my family and I are going to have a lot of fun wearing these at Christmas this year. But basically the initial inspiration came to me from my friend. Her little baby was turning 1 and she wanted her to have a party crown and she wanted it to have her name on it. So I ended up putting together a template and making the fabric party crown a few videos back. I'll link it in the video here and in the description. But I ended up making that, and I did it with 3 points. So this one has 5, it's the adult size, and I made the baby crown with 3 points, and she ended up wearing it most of the day, so that was a win. I thought, well, if a baby can wear it, then my family can wear these at Christmas lunch. So I ended up making a Christmas version, and again I used that technique where you layer different scraps on a fabric base, you add the tulle on top, and then you quilt over it. So I did that same technique but with a crown. I've made 4 crowns in total, so 2 of them are the tulle patchwork crowns just because I had a lot of scrappy scraps. And then I made one that was like kind of neat patchwork, so yeah, a little bit more tidy. You can see they're not all the same sized panels, but it's not as scrappy as the other ones. But yeah, it was a really good way to use up some small pieces that I had in my stash. Then I also made this one that is reversible, so it's got gingham red on the outside, but then if you turn it around, it's just a classic red with a green ribbon. So yeah, I've got 4 Christmas crowns that we can wear at Christmas, and there's a template for that in the description as well if you want to create those this Christmas or for a special event. Maybe you know kids that love to just dress up and you think it might be a nice gift or surprise for a special event, then you can download that for free from my website. But that was like a really quick and easy project. I know I said at the beginning of this video that my favorite projects weren't necessarily the quickest project, but they were the ones that had a bit more meaning, and I would say this one was a bit more meaningful because first of all I made it for my friend's baby's first birthday, and it was personalized. I put her name on it, she wore it all day, and that's going to be a keepsake that they have forever. But then also it's the same with Christmas crowns. You can reuse them every year and make it your own tradition. And then again, I was able to use my scraps. I care more about the projects where I can actually use what I already have on hand and I'm not creating more waste. So I think that's one of the biggest things I learned about myself this year. Like, I've always been mindful about it, but I've never fully embraced it. And I feel like most of my projects this year were scrap friendly. They were either low waste or zero waste, and it just, yeah, it's really satisfying to use what I already had in my stash. That's 7 projects that I made this year that made me kind of think differently about the way I sew and made me think a little bit more mindfully. But then I was also able to create things that I can use, or they've turned into products, they've turned into sewing patterns, they've, you know, turned into ideas for my workshops. Everything I've made has kind of come together as almost like a body of work for the year, and yeah, it all feels like it ties together nicely with a bit of a scrap busting theme, patchwork theme, and you know, mindfulness and sustainability as well. So it's all kind of tied together, and yeah, it just feels really good and feels aligned for me and my values moving forward. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. If you enjoy sewing like this as well, then you might enjoy watching some of my other videos on here. You can check out all the things I mentioned in the description below. I'll pop all the links there. I'd love to know your thoughts on some of these projects, so feel free to comment. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe if you like sewing and scrappy projects, and that's what this channel is all about. Let me know if you decide to make any of these projects. I would love to know. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.